He built a fortune selling $1 stocks, served less than 2 years behind bars, and then saw his crimes turned into a Hollywood hit. This is the story of Jordan Belfort, the man who conned a nation and made millions all over again. And the craziest part? People still celebrate him. Bayside, Queens, in the 1960s was a kind of neighborhood where everyone knew the price of hard work, but few ever escaped it. Brick houses lined the quiet streets. Fathers worked overtime, and mothers stretched paychecks like magicians. In this world of modest dreams and invisible ceilings, a restless kid named Jordan Belfort was already looking for cracks in the system. He didn't come from money, but he came with hunger, the kind that turns curiosity into obsession. While his friends talk about baseball and summer jobs, Jordan was studying people, how they spoke, what made them say yes, and how one good story could loosen the tightest grip on a dollar bill. One summer, he set up a tiny Italian ice stand by the boardwalk. The sign was hand-painted, the cooler dented, but his pitch was pure gold. 1 lemon ice for $1, he'd call out. 2 for 1, but only if you tell 3 friends. Most people laughed, but they bought. Within weeks, the kid who didn't even own a car was outselling the grown men with trucks. He discovered something adults twice his age still didn't understand. That business isn't about the product. It's about the feeling you create. Every scoop was more than frozen sugar water. It was an invitation to belong to a clever idea. By the end of the summer, he'd made $20,000. For a teenager from Bayside, that wasn't pocket change. It was proof that he could bend reality if he spoke it with enough conviction. But success can be a dangerous teacher. When the rush of winning hits early, it tells you the rules are optional. At 16, Jordan didn't dream about college or a safe paycheck. He dreamed about leverage. He watched neighbors punch clocks and come home tired, and something in him whispered, there has to be more. That whisper grew louder when he walked through the doors of dental school. On the first day, the dean looked out at the class and said, if you're here to get rich, you're in the wrong profession. The words landed like a verdict. Jordan didn't argue. He simply stood up, nodded, and walked out. Just like that, one chapter closed before it even began. He didn't want to clean teeth. He wanted to clean up. Imagine that moment. The courage it takes to abandon convention when everyone around you is clinging to it. Most people would have stayed seated, afraid of looking foolish. But Jordan had already tasted the high of persuasion. He knew he could sell ideas, sell himself, sell anything. The world looked like one giant opportunity, with a price tag waiting to be negotiated. What he didn't yet understand was that charisma, without direction, becomes chaos. He believed he was chasing freedom, but freedom without ethics is just appetite dressed as ambition. After dropping out, he dabbled in small hustles, selling door-to-door, trading gadgets, flipping anything with a margin. It didn't matter what it was. What mattered was the rhythm of the pitch, the quick pulse of a closing sale. He loved the dance between resistance and surrender, the exact second when someone changed their mind. Each deal made him feel less like a boy from Queens and more like a man who discovered a hidden code. He didn't yet see that the same code could be used to deceive. The boundary between persuasion and manipulation is thin, and he was already learning how easy it was to cross. Still, those early years were electric. The world seemed wide open, full of marks and possibilities. When people looked at him, they saw another working-class kid with a slick grin. What they didn't see was the calculation behind that grin, the curiosity that never turned off. Every rejection became research, every sale a small experiment. He wasn't chasing money, he was chasing mastery. To him, each no was just a future yes that hadn't been trained yet. There's something magnetic about people like that, those who refuse to accept smallness, who'd rather risk everything than settle for predictability. They remind us of what's possible, even when their story later turns dark. Jordan's drive was both admirable and dangerous. He wasn't a villain yet, just a young man who saw limits as invitations to cheat. And somewhere inside that relentless ambition was a seed, the belief that he could outsmart the game itself. Years later, when the headlines would call him the Wolf of Wall Street, people would wonder where it all began. It didn't start with stocks or schemes or yachts. It started here, in a neighborhood that taught him hard work, and a summer stand that taught him something even more powerful. People don't buy products, they buy promises. And soon, he'd find something far more profitable to sell than lemon ice. He didn't walk onto Wall Street as a king. He entered like a hungry apprentice, shoes polished, eyes scanning for angles. L.F. Rothschild was a cathedral to money in the late 80s. Phones screaming, printers chattering, a language of numbers and swagger. Jordan learned that language fast. He watched how brokers didn't just sell stocks, they sold certainty. They trimmed doubt from their voices the way a tailor trims loose thread. To a kid from Bayside, the noise felt like destiny, and he answered. Mentors showed him the script. Speak quickly, fill silence before fear creeps in, anchor people to a price, repeat the upside until it feels inevitable. Was it persuasion or manipulation? On that floor, no one bothered to separate the two. The market was roaring, bonuses ballooned, and restraint looked provincial. He learned how a rumor could move millions and how confidence, not truth, sets momentum. There were darker lessons, too. The culture ran on adrenaline and shortcuts. Cocaine in the stalls, liquid courage at lunch, dinners that bled into dawn. The message was simple. If it helps you sell, it's justified. Jordan absorbed it like a second education. He saw that clients didn't buy research. They bought relief from uncertainty. So he gave them relief, a polished story, a rising chart, a reason to believe they'd be early this time. That's the moral dissonance of a boom. The high feels honest while the numbers lie. He studied the tape, the cadence of ticks, the sudden gaps that made hearts flicker. He practiced compressing complex ideas into a sentence and then into a command. He mimicked the tone the senior guys use with surgeons and dentists and small business owners. Authority without empathy. Did it bother him? Not yet. He told himself he was giving people access to wealth, access to risk masquerading as certainty. The line between those two is thin enough to miss at full speed. Success arrived in quick hits. A client doubled his position. A check cleared, made his mother stare at the numbers twice. Each win built a new identity. Not Jordan from Bayside, but Jordan who could move a market with a phone call. Identity is sticky when it's reinforced by applause. The room was designed to float people upward until the ground looked optional. He felt untouchable, and untouchable men stop asking whether they should and start asking how fast. Then the pattern snapped. Black Monday, 1987. Phones that had never gone quiet fell silent. Screens bled red, swagger evaporated. You can measure courage in a crash. It's the distance between the pitch you delivered yesterday and the voicemail you don't want to return today. Jordan watched the market strip away myths in minutes. Acronyms couldn't stop gravity. Clients wanted explanations that didn't exist, and brokers who once sounded like generals stammered. For most, the lesson was humiliation. For him, it was revelation. The crash exposed how fragile the system really was. Not because markets moved, but because people did. Fear is just confidence with its makeup removed. He realized that if movement was driven by emotion, then emotion could be engineered. You don't need a blue chip name to light a fire. You need a story, urgency, and a phone line. No one was courting the millions of small investors desperate to be early for once. He had lost a job, but he had found a blueprint. The gatekeepers were guarding the front door, while the side entrance stood open. Loose rules in places the aristocrats ignored. A crowd of eager dreamers who didn't speak the private dialect of Wall Street, but were fluent in hope. If you're built like a salesman, what do you do with that? You turn vulnerability into strategy. Out of the crash, he found a loophole that would make him rich. Not a secret algorithm or rare information, but pipeline to human desire. Penny stocks, pink sheets, ground floor fantasies dressed like opportunity. What began at L.F. Rothschild as an education in markets was really an education in people. And once you understand people, how they fear missing out, how they chase belonging, how they mistake pressure for proof, you're always one phone call away from changing your life, and theirs. When Jordan lost his Wall Street job, he didn't lose his ambition. He just lost a stage big enough to hold it. The crash had burned away the illusion that money lived only in skyscrapers and trading floors. Somewhere between desperation and opportunity, he discovered a smaller world where the rules were optional. Penny stocks. These weren't the polished blue chips his mentors bragged about. They were messy, cheap, unregulated scraps of companies worth less than $1 a share. But what they lacked in reputation, they made up for in potential and commissions. 50% on every sale. To a man addicted to the sound of closing deals, that number was oxygen. He walked into a tiny Long Island brokerage where ambition met mediocrity. No suits, no marble floors, just sweat, smoke, and phones that looked like they'd survived a war. The brokers there weren't wolves. They were tired men reading scripts to clients who barely listened. But when Jordan picked up the phone, something shifted. The voice on the other end was a stranger. It was a mirror for every dream he'd ever sold himself. He smiled, leaned in, and started spinning gold. "Listen to me," he'd say. "This company is small now, yes, but it's sitting on technology that'll change home entertainment forever. I'm talking pre-IPO, under Wall Street's radar. When the big players notice, it's already too late for everyone else." He could feel the hesitation trembling through the line. That's where his instinct took over. "You don't have to understand the company, sir. You just have to understand the upside." It was elegant manipulation, dressed as opportunity, sealed with certainty. And in minutes, the man on the other end said yes. For $1,000. One phone call. No college degree, no license, no conscience required. That moment was more than a sale. It was a transformation. He'd found a formula that made human psychology bend. Fear of missing out, mixed with promise of belonging, all tied to a clock ticking down. Jordan realized he wasn't just selling stocks. He was selling emotion, hope, greed, security. Each word designed to pull the buyer deeper into the illusion of control. He hung up the phone and felt the rush that every addict knows. The heartbeat of persuasion. The godlike high of being believed. Most people think scams are about lies. They're not. They're about stories that sound too human to question. The client didn't buy a share of an unknown company. He bought a version of himself, smarter, richer, ahead of the herd. That's why scams work. They don't trick you into doubt. They convince you that your desire is logical. Jordan had discovered this truth intuitively. And once you know how to press that button, you can build an empire out of air. Over the next weeks, he refined the craft. He studied tone like a scientist, mapping which pauses made people lean forward, which jokes lowered their guard, which inflections created urgency. He called the system later, Straight Line Persuasion *. But at first it was just instinct honed by obsession. Every conversation had a start, a midpoint, and a close. The goal was to move the prospect from hello to yes in a single unbroken path. No detours, no hesitation, just momentum. He believed that if he could control the line, he could control the outcome. And he was right. Within months, his name buzzed through the office. He wasn't just closing deals. He was rewriting the playbook. Clients felt lucky to have him. Colleagues tried to imitate him. Managers whispered his pitches verbatim like scripture. Each sale reinforced a dangerous truth. Morality doesn't pay commissions, results do. That's the slippery slope of high performance. When you win too much, the rules start to feel like suggestions. He didn't need Wall Street's approval anymore. He'd build a new one out of thin air. Every call was a stage, every buyer an audience, every close a standing ovation. But beneath the applause was a quieter revelation. If he could do this alone, what could he do with a team? What if he surrounded himself with hungry people who could copy his rhythm, mimic his tone, master his line? The thought was intoxicating. One man with a phone could make thousands, but an army with his voice, they could make millions. He didn't know it yet, but that thought, the idea of multiplying his persuasion, was a spark that would ignite his empire. Straight Line Persuasion wasn't just a sales method. It was a belief system. It told every struggling kid from a forgotten neighborhood that with the right words, they could rewrite their destiny. And that's what made it dangerous. Because when you learn how to sell dreams, it becomes almost impossible to stop, especially when people beg you to keep talking. In 1989, the plan became a company. Jordan Belfort supplied the voice that could turn hesitation into momentum, and Danny Porter supplied the unruly energy that made momentum feel inevitable. They rented a cheap office and wrapped it in a rich name, Stratton Oakmont. Say it, and you taste mahogany. See it, and you get flickering lights and secondhand desks. The contrast was intentional. Names are shortcuts in the human brain. Before they try to move markets, they move perception, because perception is purchase intent wearing a suit. They did not hire resumes. They hired hunger. Bartenders, bouncers, ex-athletes, college dropouts. Anyone who could take a no like a body shot and keep talking. Interviews were pressure tests. Could you follow a script and make it sound spontaneous? Could you fill the silence before doubt wakes up? Could you hold a stranger past their own caution? If yes, welcome. If no, we will teach you until yes arrives. Credentials were replaced by quotas, and quotas were framed as destiny. Training was a psychological boot camp with a sales logo. The straight line was not suggestion. It was identity engineering. Raise your tone, lower hesitation, and pull the prospect from hello to decision without letting them wander. Questions become traps. Objections become stepping stones. Detours are the enemy. Compress time, inflate scarcity, future pace the win, and never apologize for certainty. By Friday, voices cracked like whips. By months, end rookies sounded like veterans, and many forgot they had ever sounded unsure. Prestige became theater, and Stratton staged it obsessively. The letterhead looked historic. The logo implied lineage. Framed certificates said nothing specific and suggested everything important. Jordan understood that signals sell faster than arguments, so he flooded the room with signals. Closed a big account, and champagne arrived by ritual. Topped the board, and an air horn named a monarch. Status rotated at ticker speed, and the crown felt available to anyone who could outtalk the room. Meritocracy was a costume. Choreography was a script. After hours proved the daytime story. Limousines idled. Restaurants kept the back room open. Excess was never hidden. It was a recruiting tool. Money fell like confetti, and the message was simple. This is what belief buys. Nights bled into mornings and became legends retold between calls. The whale who wired 7 figures. The watch tossed for a record day. The helicopter tracing the coastline on a dare. Spectacle is a curriculum. It teaches acceleration and punishes doubt, and the tuition is paid in promises you will later need to keep. Inside those walls, Jordan looked like a savior. He offered outsiders a script the elite hoarded. He took nobodies and turned them into somebodies by teaching them to control the weather of a conversation. Paychecks validated the gospel. Meanwhile, outside the room, the weather changed. A retiree moved savings into a stock that did not deserve faith. A parent borrowed against a home. To chase a promised package is prudence. Loss rarely screams. It arrives as paperwork. Tension at dinner, a silent calculation you avoid making. To keep the machine from seeing itself, legend outdrank conscience. Jordan became more than a boss. He became a myth with a mailbox. Aphorisms turned into metrics. Money is measurable certainty. Certainty is a decision. The line felt empowering to the floor and lethal to the people on it. When a closer stumbled, the tribe answered with ritual, chants, back slaps, the mandatory second call. Failure was temporary if the voice stayed iron. That is how tribes calcify into cults. Repetition framed as virtue and rewarded on schedule. The economics were brutally elegant. Buy blocks before the push, synchronize the floor, manufacture momentum, exit at the crest. The buyers were left with paper drifting down like confetti after parade. On the floor, it was Tuesday. In living rooms across the country, it was a lesson in how the game smiles with one face and bites with the other. People rarely remember the call that cost them. They remember the dream that explained it. Because dreams keep talking after the phone is hung up. Did the employees know? Some knew enough to stop asking. Others suspected and chose denial because denial paid better. Many believed they were helping clients graduate from smallness. The mind can file almost any fact under necessary when the bonus arrives on time. Jordan, tireless and hypnotic, modeled that posture. Forward only, questions later. Build a room where talent feels like destiny and momentum sounds like morality. and you can make almost anyone mistake pressure for proof. Meanwhile, the phones kept ringing with new money. Referrals arrived because confidence is contagious and brief. Blinding results outperform marketing. The firm added lines, hired voices widened the funnel. Systems scaled. Conscience did not. Scripts traveled like folklore. Copied, smuggled, retold. The brand gathered weight it had not earned, authority it had not purchased, prestige it did not deserve. In performance, culture perception outruns truth. And by the time truth arrives, the room has already spent the bonus. Recruitment shifted into evangelism. The pitch was not just income, it was identity. If you can close, you can drive a Ferrari. And if you can drive a Ferrari, you are no longer who your past says you are. Identity moves quickly when applause is paid in cash. First, you act like a closer. Then you're called a closer. And then you defend a costume as if it were skin. That costume insulated the floor from hard questions and turned victims into abstractions. Abstractions are easy to ignore at 60 calls an hour. But outside, patterns leave footprints. Regulators notice when price lines spike without substance. Journalists notice when complaints cluster in the same towns. Former employees with bruised pride notice everything. Success that loud attracts attention, and enemies. What sounded like applause on the floor sounded like a siren to the world. And sirens, as experience teaches, are followed by lights. Jordan could not yet see the convoy forming, but the route was charted by each overconfident pitch and every doctor justification. Even then, inside the office, momentum felt mortal. Long streaks teach a dangerous lesson. Repetition masquerades as permanence. The crew believed the show would run forever because so far it had. They were too busy winning to notice the stagehands assembling in the wings, too in love with the mirror to register the crack. The empire had been summoned with words, fed with worship and armored with noise. Empires built on sound require silence to survive, and that silence was finally gathering at the door. The silence was coming. The first crack didn't sound like a crash. It rustled like paper. Subpoenas with clean seals, requests for trade logs, lists of names that remembered more than the room wanted to admit. The Securities and Exchange Commission didn't sprint at Stratton Oakmont. It walked patiently, asking for dates, wires, and authorizations. Jordan had built a culture where speed outran doubt. The SEC lived on doubt, documented, and signed. That friction, speed against patience, was gravity asserting itself. Bank trails do not care about charisma. Inquiries went to clearing firms, then to banks that moved money to Switzerland and the Caribbean, then to branches that thought distance made them invisible. Cashier's checks appeared in regular denominations that made irregular sense. Deposits skipped a day or returned from a different city with the same handwriting. Some funds paused in London or Geneva before settling under shells named to sound older than their owners. Paper, if you collect enough of it, tells a story no storyteller can edit. Inside, success still roared, but the storm gathered under the carpet. Home became a courtroom, without a judge. Arguments started as questions and ended as inventory. Late nights, white lines, vanished hours. Drugs that once felt celebratory became necessary, then compulsory. You can measure the distance from control to addiction by counting the lies you tell yourself to keep pace. He believed more of everything would dull the edge. It only made the blade brighter. Then the ocean delivered its deposition. The yacht Nadine left Italy for Sardinia against the captain's warning, a floating thesis on invincibility. The wind replied. Waves rose like overdue statements. Helicopters lifted passengers into indifferent air. But when the water ascendants arrived, no broker could negotiate. Nature does not buy your pitch. The man who thought he could sell anything, even fate, met a market he could not move. People love the highlight reel. The rescue, the jewelry, the absurd calm. But the aftermath mattered more. Survival rearranges sound inside a house. The marriage that renamed the yacht had been taking on water too. Mistrust leaks before it floods. After the storm, nothing new was said. The unsaid was undeniable. Authority prefers patience to spectacle. Gregory Coleman, FBI Financial Crimes, didn't chase headlines. He chased patterns. He built timelines instead of theories. A call binge mapped to a price spike. A spike matched a block purchase. The block ran to a wire. The wire landed in a shell that paid for something a salary couldn't justify. He read scripts against recordings and traced checks that walked across casinos before reappearing as art. What would you do? Cornered by the paperwork of your own velocity. Many get louder. Jordan went louder and faster. A new account here, a courier there, reassurances for rooms trained to worship confidence. Momentum teaches a cruel lesson. When pressure rises, press harder. The wiser move is to stop. But gamblers double. Sellers sell. He still believed he could close time the way he closed men on the phone. Time belongs to the patient, and patients had badges. The office split into 2 clocks. One measured commissions by the hour. The other counted legal minutes. Some brokers sensed a draft and slipped out quietly. Others stayed, pinned by bonuses and pride. The culture answered with more noise. Louder bells, bigger checks, longer nights. But noise is camouflage, not armor, and camouflage fails when someone stands close enough to see the seams. Coleman's montage did not look like cinema. It looked like a legal pad with coffee bruises, and a phone that rang Zurich before sunrise. It sounded like the click when a timestamp matched the day his stock doubled. He needed enough, not everything. Enough to allege manipulation, to show intent, to ask a judge for keys to an office that mistook volume for victory. He crossed one. Fear is contagious, but so is composure. The closer the investigation crept, the sharper the contrast became. Stratton's carnival against the government's calm. Doors that once flew open to applause would soon open to a different ritual. Phones that never slept would be lifted, labeled, and sealed. Hard drives would whisper as they were cloned. The finale would not be a roar but gloves, boxes, and forms. That is the pattern interrupt no sales floor rehearses. Silence. If you're tempted to say it couldn't happen to you, that is how it happens. Confidence edits out warnings, until only the soundtrack remains. The SEC had been writing a counter melody for months. The FBI found the harmony. The raid would not surprise anyone who had been reading. It would only surprise those who refused to. And somewhere under the noise, even they knew, dread is knowledge we will not name. By the time the convoy assembled, the Empire still looked invincible from the inside. That is perception's final trick. Success trains you to confuse motion with safety, volume with truth, loyalty with innocence. Gravity does not care about motion, and greed always meets it. The day the doors opened to agents instead of clients, the story changed tense. The future stopped being a promise and became evidence. They didn't arrest a legend. They arrested a man in an office with phones. The raid felt nothing like the movies Jordan had promised his brokers. No music, no speeches, just agents with warrants, moving with procedure. Desks opened, drives cloned, phones labeled. The room that once thundered with victory bells yielded to the soft thud of cardboard. He had sold momentum for years. Now the government sold him silence. Indictments rippled outward. Subpoenas hardened into charges. Words he used as metaphors, wire, clearing, block, return as evidence with chain of custody numbers. Counsel translated bravado into risk. Securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy. The math was ugly, years, not months. He'd taught a generation to close. Now prosecutors wanted him closed. What does a closer do when the yes he needs belongs to a judge? He sold again, this time information. Cooperation became currency. Meetings in quiet rooms. Names exchanged for leniency. Scripts compared to recordings. He wore a wire, brought it back filled with voices that had once cheered him. Partners turned into exhibits. Friends became timelines. The wolf, suddenly careful, learned to whisper. Plea agreements speak a dry language. Counts dismissed, counts admitted, restitution reserved. His read like a surrender with clauses. Facing decades, he bargained himself down to months. 22 of them. The number looked miraculous beside the damage. And that's where relief slips into discomfort. Viewers exhale, then wonder who paid for that breath. A court order laid out the bill. More than $100 million in restitution. Interest accruing while the world kept moving. Prison when you're famous is a strange kind of quiet. Minimum security substitutes spectacle with repetition. Wait, count, chores yard. The roar of Stratton Oakmont shrank to the tick of a wall clock and the hiss of sprinklers. There was a tennis court, a joke, loud years traded for a polite back and forth. The man who once juggled yachts and IPOs now bartered time with laps and pages. He had been king of noise. Now he studied stillness. In that stillness, he met a listener with a comedian's timing and a convict's patience. Tommy Chong. 2 men, 2 paths, an afternoon that became ritual. Jordan told stories the way other inmates traded cigarettes, yachts, pills, chaos. The sales floor safari. Tommy didn't moralize. He diagnosed. Write it down. The advice landed like a door opening in a windowless room. If the market punished you, sell a new product. The truth framed as entertainment. He began to draft a life he had performed. On paper, the speeches slowed, the scenes sharpened, the excuses sounded thin. Writing is inventory. It shows you which assets were hallucinations. He realized he had been selling belief long before the first cold call. The memoir took shape as a confession with jokes, a tour through appetites disguised as ambition. Poetic justice has a wicked sense of humor. The man who sold fake stocks would sell one last thing: redemption. Sentencing makes everything official. A judge's voice, a ledger precision, a timeline stamped with federal ink. 22 months. Supervised release afterward. Restitution that would outlive headlines. Authority clears smoke. The trading floor's mythology could not argue with the docket. Contrast is the clearest teacher. From a room where applause measured worth to a yard where no one cared who you used to be. Even there, the salesman rehearsed. He imagined rooms beyond the fence lines, publishers, studios, audiences who loved a well-told fall. He knew the moral hazard and prepared the moral anyway. Not a plea for sympathy, but a promise of insight. People forget what dazzles them. They purchase what flatters them. If he could package the lesson as entertainment, the market would meet him halfway. He had flipped on his partners. Soon he would flip his past. When the gates opened, the transformation walked out with him. He wasn't the wolf anymore. He was the narrator. The manuscript would become a memoir. The memoir of franchise. The franchise a stage where he could sell ethics while collectors counted unpaid checks. Irony peaked like a chart at open. The loudest pitch of his life was about his own sins, and buyers lined up once more. And the cameras were already waiting. That was not the end. It was the rebrand. The book arrived first, slick and unapologetic. In 2007, he published The Wolf of Wall Street and turned his past into a performance you could underline. The sentences swaggered. The punchlines landed. The remorse felt like a prop placed carefully on a shelf. It worked because it invited us to sit close to the fire without getting burned. You weren't endorsing fraud. You were bearing witness to audacity. And once you've paid for a ticket, your mind prefers a story where you are learning, not enabling. That's the subtle alchemy of confession as entertainment. It launders the emotion, not the facts, and we thank it for the favor. Then came the upgrade only Hollywood can deliver. Martin Scorsese took the manuscript. Leonardo DiCaprio took the mask. And in 2013, the world met a version of Jordan that was impossible to look away from. Crowds laughed at scenes that ruined real lives, then argued on a ride home about whether the movie criticized excess or celebrated it. Oscar chatter turned outrage into glamour. Cognitive dissonance did the rest. We told ourselves that entertainment is an endorsement, yet laughter is a kind of vote, and box office is a referendum. When the credits ended, the reputation didn't. It compounded. While the applause echoed, the brand scaled. He toured as a motivational speaker, taught persuasion as a science, sat for interviews, launched podcasts, sold courses, and repackaged the hustle as a curriculum in personal power. Rooms were full. Invoices cleared. The wolf became a logo, and the world treated it like a merit badge. Meanwhile, restitution crawled. Teachers who lost retirements, veterans who trusted the pitch, families who refinanced for the promise of early. Many waited while interest outpaced apology. A court order put numbers on the ledger. The market put a spotlight on the storyteller. Prosperity returned to the stage before justice returned to the victims. Why did we make room for him again? Charm helps, but it isn't the whole answer. We admire audacity because it flatters our stalled bravery. The outlaw frees us from the caution we resent in ourselves. So we borrow his swagger and call it insight. In private, we swear we'd never be fooled. In public, we cheer the man who fooled thousands. That contradiction is the price of the ticket. He didn't just escape justice, he monetized it. And we bought the deluxe edition. So, what do you do with that discomfort? You study it. You notice when spectacle tempts you to rename harm as hustle. You ask who pays when geniuses refuse to. You learn to tell the difference between growth and appetite, between a lesson and a lure. And you keep watching, not as a fan, but as a student of how stories move money and how charisma bend the frame. If you want more unglamorized deep dives into power, persuasion, and the myths we keep buying, subscribe to this channel. Join the conversation, and let's keep our judgment sharper than the hype. New episodes every week.